Shalom and welcome back to Sedra Summary. The greatest human calamity over which we would seem to have some control is violence. Violence, of course, is different than disease or natural disaster. It would seem, at least at first, unreasonable to blame God for human violence. It seems to stem from human beings. Let us see how the book of Genesis accounts for the introduction of the first violence into the world in the case of homicide, the story of Cain and Abel. Adam and his wife Eve became the parents of two sons, first Cain, then Abel. Abel became a shepherd, and Cain a farmer. Both brought offerings to the Eternal, Cain from the produce of the earth, and Abel from the choicest of the firstborn of his flock. The Eternal showed regard to Abel's gifts, but not to Cain's. Regarding Cain's displeasure, the Eternal encouraged him to do better in the future. But Cain rose up against Abel his brother in the field and killed him. "Where is Abel your brother?" asked the Eternal. "I do not know," answered Cain. "Am I my brother's keeper?" "What have you done?" replied the Eternal. "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." The Eternal thereupon denied Cain much success in farming the land, which had accepted his brother's blood, and made him a homeless wanderer. Cain despaired of surviving the curse, but the Eternal promised him sevenfold vengeance and placed a sign upon him to warn away any who might think to do him harm. Cain removed himself from the Eternal's presence and dwelled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. When Cain kills Abel, God exclaims, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Midrash notices that the words "to me" seem superfluous, really unexpected. We could understand if God said, "Your brother's blood cries out from the ground," or "Your brother's blood cries out against Cain from the ground," but "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground" suggests to the rabbis that these words were put into the Torah in order to produce a rabbinic or Talmudic inference. That is what happens in Midrash, noticing words that don't quite fit, but that were put there by the author of the Torah, by God, in order to imply another lesson that might not be immediately apparent in the natural context of the verse. In this case, the rabbis suggest that God felt indicted by the murder committed by Cain against Abel, that Abel was appealing or crying out or really himself indicting God for the fact that Cain murdered him. What could that mean in the moral order of the universe or of the world, which was developing at this point? Responsibility is a fluid assignment. It would seem at first that Cain was simply responsible for the murder of his brother. But the rabbis put it this way: the two of them were like gladiators in front of their king. If the king had wanted to prevent Abel's death, he could have separated the brothers, but he didn't. So God, the king, cried out over Abel's death, "Your brother's blood cries out against me from the ground." To me really is against me from the ground. Who will seek justice on my behalf before and against my king? Thus, Abel is saying. There is, very shortly after this part of the Torah, the reflection that God makes in anticipation of the story of Noah. Vayar Adonai ki rabba ra'at ha'adam ba'aretz. The Eternal sees that the evil of man upon earth is great, and every yetzer, every impulse of the thoughts of his heart are only evil all day. And so it goes on, the Eternal regrets having made the man and placed him upon the earth. And you'll find this in chapter 6 of Genesis. This phrase, yetzer, machshavot libo, the impulse of the thoughts of his heart, are at the root of a rabbinic doctrine that the human being has essentially two strong moral impulses: the yetzer hatov, the good impulse, and the yetzer hara, the evil impulse. So that here the indictment could be that God created man with an evil impulse. This is the impulse of Cain that is present in all human beings, but in some of which lead them to commit acts of violence and even murder. So Cain's killing Abel was certainly Cain's responsibility, but it was also attributable to the way that God created Cain. And again, Cain is an example of all humanity. He created us with a yetzer hara, with an evil impulse. And that is of major concern to the rabbis and should be of concern to all of us, to recognize the potential that all men possess for doing violence against each other. Now let's dig a bit deeper into the words of that same verse. We often speak of the infinite value of a single human life. The words in the verse are Kol demei achicha, the voice of your brother's blood, Tzoakim Elai, cries out to me, min ha'adama, from the ground. The words in Hebrew are actually in the plural. If I were to read it to you literally, you would hear the voice of the bloods of your brother, cry out, and there the Hebrew verb is also in the plural, to me from the ground. Demei achicha, the bloods of your brother. Now, actually, even in English, sometimes in medical institutions, the taking of blood, which is of course, a routine diagnostic procedure, sometimes the word is bloods. It's interesting. In ancient Hebrew, plurals could mean not only a multiplicity of individual units, but also that it was used, the plurality was used as an abstraction, as a substantive. So in other words, the idea of blood in the plural, the absolute form would be damim. Dam would be blood in the singular, damim in the plural. That could mean blood in general, as an abstraction. But from the point of view of post-biblical Hebrew, it seemed odd that Abel's blood was characterized in the plural. And as we have begun to see in Midrash, words that just don't exactly fit the neat context of the verse are signals to the rabbis of a midrash, of the derivation of a lesson that's not immediately apparent in the context. Here, the use of the plural, the rabbi said, implies the blood not only of your brother cries out to me, but also the blood of his eventual descendants, whom you, Cain, have prevented by your murder of your brother. So it is not only Abel's blood that cries out to God, but also the blood of all of those who might have been born of Abel and his children and grandchildren and so forth. All of them were effectively murdered by this one act of homicide by Cain against his brother. The rabbis go on to say, for this reason, humanity was created from one person, to teach us that if one destroys a single life, it is as if he has destroyed an entire world. And if one upholds a single life, it is as if he has upheld an entire world.